Hello, hello, and welcome to Saturday Soundbites. I'm your host, Veronica, and I am thrilled to be here with you for another fantastic episode. And at Saturday Soundbites, we talk all things visibility strategy, communications, marketing, advertising, public relations, branding, all of those components that really make up a strong communication plan, communication strategy to help you grow your business, whether it's a brick and mortar business, whether it's an online entrepreneur venture that you're launching, or anything in between. So I focus on bringing you guests that will be able to bring you some content and strategies that will really help you in all of those areas. And it's really my favorite thing to do on Saturday mornings, and that's to talk about visibility strategy and communication. So today I have a phenomenal guest. Her name is Amy Jones. And Amy is going to really talk about leadership. This is a C-suite executive. She is the CEO of a very large corporation. I will have her introduce herself and tell you a little bit about herself. But the reason why she's on the show is because corporate leadership and the leadership communication style is a little bit different than what you might see in another part of an organization. So I wanted you to hear from this expert, learn some tips and strategies, and really just connect so that you can use that in your business and grow your communication strategy. So if you are listening on our podcast, make sure you hit subscribe so that you get notified of all of our episodes. If you're watching on Facebook, make sure you drop us some comments so that we can connect. And if you're catching the replay, #replay, and Amy and I will get back to you. So thank you so much for tuning in. And with that, I'm going to introduce Miss Amy. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Saturday Soundbites.
Good morning.
So glad to have you. Look at that view that's the skyline of Austin, Texas, Amy.
That
so
is.
Glad
it
you
is
are
indeed.
here. Oh, yeah, fantastic. So tell us a little bit about yourself. I mentioned that you're a CEO, and I want people to hear your journey and learn a little bit about how you got to be where you're at.
Great. Okay. Thank you. It's so good to see you, Veronica. So my path to a CEO position was really not traditional, and it was not something I imagined myself for early in my career. I have a journalism degree from the University of Texas. Hook 'em. We have a big game today. It's the Red River rivalry.
Yes.
Anyway, I was at UT, and I wanted to be a magazine editor. My passion was in communications, but specifically how you communicate information in print layout, design, and that's where I thought I would go. But while in college, I found a great paid internship at a state association for school business officials. And it was through that part-time job, which really turned into my first salaried position, that I learned that every organization and business needs communications expertise to communicate internally with members and staff, but then also to communicate externally with public and with clients. And I learned that you can really apply a communications degree to any sort of a job in any business or industry. So I was there for a while. I developed a newsletter and a magazine and did all the publications in PR. And then I went on to work at the Chamber of Commerce in Austin. There I was representing a school and chamber partnership program in a large school district, which I think is probably how we came to know each other.
It is.
So I was involved in school public relations, but from a different perspective. I took on the role of providing communications, PR, marketing for the partnership program. We communicated volunteer opportunities to businesses, and we shared success stories with the community. And so in that role, I was very involved in promoting the brand for the organization and in developing relationships and a strong network of contacts in the local business community, as well as with regional education leaders. So a few years into that position, a board member for the partnership program, someone who'd actually hired me, and then he was the chair, and then he was the past chair, he asked me to lunch. And I remember telling my husband, I am not sure why he's asking me to lunch. And he said, well, he's going to offer you a job. And I said, what on earth would I do for him? He's an architect. And sure enough, he asked me to apply for the first full-time marketing director position that they were going to have at this architecture and engineering firm. Previously, they'd had a technical professional in the role who was very familiar with architecture, engineering, and construction. He knew the business, but he wasn't a communicator, if you will. Mm-hmm. And he didn't really understand public relations and that whole networking component as it related to communications. The firm was looking to grow, and the partners leading the business knew They needed to establish and promote their brand, expand their name and expertise recognition in order to meet their growth goals.
Mm-hmm.
So I joined O'Connell Robertson as the first full-time focused marketing director 24 years ago. At the time, I wasn't even sure how I was going to fulfill that role because I knew nothing about architecture and engineering. And of course, I never imagined becoming president and CEO of the organization. And so the marketing and communications role grew into business development and client relationships. And then I added a project executive role because we found that I could communicate the design plan and the resources to a client's mission and goals very effectively alongside designers and engineers who were focused on technical solutions.
Mm-hmm.
So over time, my role expanded to providing leadership for all the business development, the marketing, the communications, community relations, as well as having this client liaison project executive role. And I became a principal or a partner in the firm in 2004. So now, as president and CEO, I lead our corporate strategy and vision, I guide talent and people issues, and I manage operational activities while I continue to provide strategic direction for our marketing and business development team. And I would have to say what I am most surprised about now in the CEO role is the amount of time I spend communicating internally after so many years being the external face of the firm.
Yeah, it's almost like it went full circle from journalism degree to the seat as the president and CEO. The internal communication seems to be really a high priority for you in your role as a leader.
It's a very high priority now, and it's a big shift because I spent so much time developing those external relationships. So, the good thing is I've got a great team that are now carrying that brand out into the community and the region, a team of business developers that are super strong in that role. And it's fun and really interesting to see them doing the things that I did for so long and doing them very well. Because the time that you spend as a CEO on people issues and communications internally and guiding the external communications and the messaging certainly is just significant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And do you feel like as a leader, your communication style had to change? I know we've talked a little bit about responsiveness and timeliness. So when you're in the communications office or you're a part of that team, there are tasks that are signed, there's deadlines, there's, criteria that has to be met, drafts that had to be reviewed. But as a CEO, that communication style has to change a little bit, I would think.
Oh, it definitely does. And that's such an interesting question. There's two things I'd love to say related to that. One is that there was a time a couple of years ago, and one of my partners, we have several partners at the firm, but he's very technically focused. And so, a lot of what I did for probably 10 years here at the firm, not very many people internally saw it because I've been so heavily engaged in the community and in business development, just calling on clients, certainly, but engaging at the Chamber of Commerce and on educational foundations and other organizations that would lead to growth in our business through relationships. And he happened to see me at an event and see me talking with people and interacting. And I can't even remember if I was presenting that day, but he came back to the office the next day and he said, I've never seen you in that role. And I don't think anyone in this firm internally understands what you really do and how you do it. You don't communicate that way when you're here. You're not here as much. And so he said, I really wish more people could see you communicate like that. And I just hadn't really thought about it. And so it definitely, it in some ways, it sort of released me. And as I was transitioned into the president role, it was sort of like, okay, now I have to bring that internally. I really have to help, the team feel that and see that. And then the other thing I would say about, how that happens, one of the things that happened during COVID is, we had to communicate a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And what I would say to a leader about that is when you become the CEO or the president, you really are the voice of the firm, you have to take time to plan your communications. So while you mentioned, as a communications professional, that's the full-time job, you've got tasks and you have messaging. It's similar, but it's different in the way that you have to really connect with everyone more personally, and they pay more attention, I think is what I would say. When you're in that marketing and communications role, you're just kind of speaking the brand and you're promoting things. But as a CEO and president, you have to plan what you're going to say and be very thoughtful about it in the way that how is everybody going to receive this?
Mm-hmm.
And you can't wait too long when you've got an issue that you need to develop. So you have to develop a sense of timing. When do you need to step out and make a statement? But with this advice, remember that people are really paying attention. This became so apparent during the pandemic, and everyone hears things differently. So when we were communicating critical COVID updates or operating updates due to the changing health and work environment, I would spend some time writing, just the 2 or 3 paragraphs that I was going to say on a virtual call or on a virtual meeting. And I would spend time writing it. I would review it, and then I would set it aside, and then I'd look at it again, even if it was 15 minutes later. And I would read it. And then if you can find someone to look at it that is from a different perspective, and hopefully it's kind of the same person that you always have look at what you're going to release before you release it as the CEO, because they need to know your tone. And then, we would deliver the message. And what I found was everyone heard it differently. So we then began to follow up the verbal message with the written message. And it was so helpful for me to have thought out what I was going to say, because then I could go right back to those key points and that messaging translated into an internal email or an internal message through Teams that we would send. And I would follow it up, because what I learned is people were just hanging on every word sometimes, but 2 different people would hear the same message completely different. And so really as a CEO, you have to realize people are listening to you. You're not just talking. And sometimes as a communications or marketing professional, you're hoping that your message is landing and it's going to encourage someone to do something. But as the CEO, you're guiding and you're helping and you're leading and you're informing, and you're doing a lot in your communications that you need to think about.
Yeah, I love that. And I haven't really thought about that distinction very much, but that makes sense. And it's almost like, and you mentioned COVID, you as the CEO are driving the culture. And when you have to deal with either, pandemic, perfect example, when you're dealing with a disruption to the type of business that you've led, your communication has to help drive the culture you want to see. And so I would love for you to talk a little bit about culture and branding, because I think as a marketing person, again, there are tactics, there are strategies, there's a SWOT analysis, there's some type of feedback loop that's going to be assessed, and it's part of the job. But for a CEO, that doesn't look the same way, and it's got completely different intentionality. So I'd love your thoughts on how all of that plays into driving the culture from a leadership seat.
Sure. And that is such a tremendous issue right now, and has been over the last year and a half. It became clear very quickly that the remote work environment could have some negative impacts on our staff. And we're not a huge organization. At the start of the pandemic, we had 65 employees across 2 offices and a brand new office, very small, in Houston, that we opened the month before COVID. Which is a whole nother story. But we realized that this was really going to have a negative impact on our staff, because so suddenly we all were remote from one another. So I reached out pretty quickly and researched and sought out some best practices from around the country in our industry, but especially other industries like the tech industry, where they had been working remote for a long time. And what we ended up doing is, we just pulled ideas from a number of different firms and speakers that we heard, and developed what we called a corporate engagement program. We launched that in June of 2020 to really ensure strong communications, continued high participation by our staff in the work, and trying to maintain or maybe even stir up a more robust firm culture during those work from home conditions. And the plan really addressed leadership and staff support. We had to look at mentoring. We have some young, fresh out of college employees, and culture through a variety of regular check-ins, conversations, and meetings. So it really all centered around communications. And I think had I not been a communications professional first and foremost, we might have overlooked the need for something with structure like this, or we just wouldn't have been attentive enough to the issue. So what we did specifically, we just created a whole series of activities. We established weekly all staff phone calls, and we did that almost immediately. So every Monday morning at 9:30, everyone in the firm is on a call, a virtual call, and we use Teams, Microsoft Teams for that. But in those meetings, we would communicate that your job, that the company, there was financial security, we're doing okay. It was a very, we tried to make sure that we were reinforcing the concern and the fear that people had about their jobs and the work. And so we were very intentional about that. And I think that was a very important part of stabilizing everyone. Then we developed what we called departmental team check-ins. And those were short, like 20-minute meetings every single week to ensure each employee was staying connected to their team. It provided an opportunity for sharing maybe tips around the software that we use, or a design kind of charrette or a check-in. And it ensured that we were addressing problems that might come up and they didn't know who to reach out to. Then we also established a fun component of this. We called them water cooler chats. And they were weekly off-work topic one-on-ones with someone in the company. And you never knew who it was going to be till Monday morning. An email would come out with, here's your assignment for your water cooler chat this week. And we mixed everybody up and randomly matched two people and had a question that you were supposed to talk about with that person on a virtual call. And, it was everything from what was your first job to, what was your first car and what did you learn this week that was not related to work. And it was just a great opportunity for everyone to connect with someone different who they might not be talking to, sort of to replace that inner office, just casual conversation that you could have. So we did that. We added a Monday morning leadership call with the principals in the firm, because we even found after, 3 or 4 weeks, we weren't talking to each other. And so we established that every week. And then every other week, we had a call with our senior team, sort of that next level of emerging leaders and managers, to check in with them because they were carrying a heavy load of supporting the younger staff, and just to help them with some management techniques and, those soft skills around team building and supervision and leadership. And then we even overlaid on that. I think there was every other month, we divided up the entire staff among the leaders of the firm, the 5 principals, and we all made a one-on-one personal call. And so we just recognize that when you're in a normal work environment, there's just layers of conversation and connectivity that you have that just went away.
Yeah.
And I think that the communications, the tone of the communications had to shift. It wasn't just about work. It was being compassionate. It was being supportive. And I think that's one of the things that leaders don't always think about, is that you need to be able to operate as a leader on multiple levels of communications really all the time. And I see them in 3 ways. One is, you're the corporate news and information leader, right? Yeah. So you need to know what's going on. You're a leader of the firm. You're an ambassador. You have a PR role, externally and also internally, to kind of get everybody to feel good about what's happening. But then sometimes you have to wear, what I call the radical candor hat. And you have to care personally, but you have to challenge directly. You have to make sure people are, understanding their role, and that they're held accountable at times for what they need to do. That's kind of being the boss that you have to do. And then, all the time, but over the past year more than ever, you have to be able to have a compassionate conversation with someone as well.
Yes.
And I learned fast that at any given time, every employee you have, or any employee you have, is dealing with a significant personal issue.
Yeah.
And when you've got 65 or 70 employees, someone is having a family crisis, a personal health issue, maybe a challenge as a parent. And over the last year, those typical things were compounded by COVID, by the Texas freeze, which
Yes.
impacted our staff.
Yes.
I spent one of those days literally sitting in my husband's truck in the driveway 4 hours with my phone plugged in, because we had no power, we had no water, and it was day 3 of the freeze. And I had just my phone and the company, the cell phone list of everyone in the company. And I was just calling. We had been trying to share some messaging, but we couldn't even access our network. So just calling and texting people to check in. There was not, I couldn't do every single person that day, but there were some high priorities, people I knew we were really concerned about, and just checking in on them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's phenomenal. And I think probably the pandemic, and then definitely the snowstorm, at least for those of us in Texas that experienced that, create an opportunity for us to listen people in a different way. Because, previously as an organization, you can listen your staff with a technology-based system where people can call in, or there's a hotline. But all of a sudden, when those technology resources aren't there, what do you do as a leader to listen to what's happening to your folks? The culture is dependent on you stepping up and taking that lead role as a listener.
Absolutely. And I have to say, at our firm, and I'm sure many, if not every firm, the staff just stepped up to help each other in an amazing way. I would, reach out to somebody to say, hey, how are you doing? Do you have heat? Do you have water? And they might tell me, oh, thanks for checking in. Actually, so-and-so, Kim, called me and she had heat and water. And so I'm here at her place for the day or for the night. And, it was just great how the team supported each other. But I like to think that the work that we had been doing for the 6 or 8 months prior to that on communications and engagement, helped with that. The groundwork was laid. And I think that it's important that as a leader, you communicate that you're there for them to listen when they need to talk. And you'll spend a lot of time doing that, but it's so important. Otherwise,
Absolutely.
You don't know what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great way to gauge your culture and where you're at. And I think as a leader too, there are probably some things that we were doing before the pandemic that were effective, but were no longer effective now. So do you have any tips or strategies or any thing that you have discovered as the CEO of an organization, a good sized organization, that have helped you and that you'd like to share with others on how to communicate?
So I think that one of the keys is to be consistent with your communications, right? So if you are communicating on a regular basis, make sure you're communicating on some of the key same things, so people know what to expect from you. But then make sure that you are checking in with some other people around the organization to know what you need to be touching on. What are some of the concerns, particularly over this last year. I think we learned that, and hopefully that'll be something we carry through. And continue to make sure you understand what your staff is feeling. And, a big topic right now with our staff and staff all around the country and the globe is, workplace overload is what we like to call it. It's known as burnout. And, that's an issue. It's a concern for us as employers and leaders. And it's a real experienced thing. It's a real issue for people, and it's intangible, but it is felt clearly.
Yeah.
And we're dealing with it at our firm and trying to understand, trying to make sure that people feel comfortable communicating about it. For a long time, you didn't talk about it. You would never tell your boss you felt burned out. And we're trying to make sure that our staff and our team understand that we want you to be able to talk about it. We want to be able to support you in that. And what the key is, and the biggest challenge is, how do we support our staff in those feelings and those challenges and still serve our clients in a growing and thriving company? And it's a challenge, and we're still, working through it. But I think what's really important for a leader is to make sure that you communicate, you're willing to talk about it, you want to listen, and you want to try to help find solutions, and you want to be solutions oriented about it, but make sure that everyone is okay.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. And I think that's true for any size organization. Again, a traditional business, a nonprofit, a political action group, a stay-at-home entrepreneur mom who's got a little team going. That's key to success. So I love that you ended it with that. So Amy, tell us a little bit before we go about some of the other interests that you have. First of all, I love when fellow journalists and those of us who are trained in this space find themselves in really successful seats like yours, completely unexpected. I just love that, because that's phenomenal to me. But I want to hear about some of the other things that drive you and some of your other interests that kind of incorporate all those parts of your past.
Sure. Thank you. Well, of course, we're very focused on our firm's Vision 2025. So O'Connell Robertson is on a growth trajectory, and we want to continue that. So we're growing our firm. We design schools and hospitals and university facilities all around Texas, and that's a major focus. And we're focused on that in two areas: the area of client attainment and revenue growth, but also the success and happiness of our people. We want every person to feel supported in their career goals here at O'Connell Robertson. So that takes a lot of my time. But the other passion that has been developing over the last year and really growing is getting more involved in the issues around the diversity deficit in the architecture, engineering, and construction industry. So I don't know if you're aware, but only 30% of the AEC industry is represented by females. Wow. And it's really concerning, but only 16% of principals in firms across the country are women.
Wow.
And I think that needs to change. There is a lot of data and statistics around the number of women who are in architecture and engineering programs in college and graduate with those degrees, and they come into the workforce, but they leave at some point and they don't reach leadership positions at the same level as men do. And we need to change that, because women are just as capable leaders, strong, and really some of the areas we've talked about: communications, compassionate communications, and even vision and strategy. I like to think sometimes women are even better in some of those areas. But so that's a real strong focus of mine. I've been involved in a program over the last year called Elevate Her, that is a sponsored program in the AEC industry. And we brought together a cohort of individuals, men and women of all gender, race, ethnicity, and cultures, to come together to study this issue. And we worked on projects, and we've got some resources out there on the Elevate Her website around this. And so that's just another one of the things that I'm really passionate in, not only for the industry, but also for our firm.
Yeah, I love that. I love it so much. And I've got some friends in this space as well. And so I love that there is a drive and an organized effort to really bring awareness to this opportunity, because we have phenomenal, talented young architects who are going in this space, and we want to be able to provide them leadership and mentor opportunities and a pathway to end up in the CEO seat. And so that just warms my heart, and I'm all about it. And I'm just so glad that you're doing it.
Absolutely. It's been a great experience.
Oh, I'm so glad. Well, Amy, thank you so much for your time. Everything you have said resonated with me. I took some notes. I'm going to be sure to also put them in the show notes on the podcast, so when folks are downloading it, they can learn more information, especially about Elevate Her, if that is a space that they are in. So thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure.
You bet. It's great to see you, Veronica. And for all the Longhorns out there, Hook 'em horns.
All right. Thank you so much. Great, you
Bye.
guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode and took note. Amy had some phenomenal tips and strategies, especially when it comes to connecting with your folks internally and the value that that will bring to your brand and to your culture. It really spoke to my heart, and I hope you took note too. So with that, I'm going to wrap up this episode of Saturday Soundbites. You can go to our website at veronicavsofer.com to check out our past episodes. And if you are listening on the podcast, don't forget to hit subscribe. We want to make sure that you catch every episode. And if you are watching on the replay, #replay on Facebook. And with that, I'm sending you lots of positive energy and light.